Hi, I'm really pleased to talk to all of you. So this talk is the result of an article I wrote for New Roots, and I really would like to chat with you to hear a little bit about your own experience and well, and just to do what we do best, that is to share thoughts and experiences here. Hi, Alessandra, how are you? So, since I want to get to know you a little bit better, let me let me talk a little bit about myself. So, my name is Carla, nice to meet you. So, these are my affiliations. So, at the moment, I work at the University of Sheffield and the University of Surrey in the UK. And I'm also the CEO of Educantes, which is a learning platform. If you want to learn more about that, feel just free to click on Educantes, and then you will learn more about. It's a international platform. We offer language courses in the UK, but also teacher training courses and a bunch of different things. Also in Brazil. Okay, so let me then start by asking you a couple of questions. So I would like to know the following questions. So in one sentence, tell me a little bit about your background. And why do you consider this topic, the one that we are going to talk about it now, interesting? Why is it important? Do you consider yourself a bilingual speaker? Yes, no, why? For you, what's the importance of speaking more than one language? Okay, so I'm just going to give you 5 minutes for you to then work on these questions so we can get to know each other a little bit more. Hi, Benvenuta. So could you please answer? Well, I've just posted a couple of questions just so we can start to get to know, I can get to know you a little bit more. And it would be great if you could answer questions 1, 2, and 3, please. I will give you 4 more minutes, and then I'm afraid I will have to move on. So if you could please just answer these questions, that would be marvelous. Okay, so I'm so sorry for those who have just joined, but I will just end this. Oh, could you actually answer, Patricia, could you actually answer there? I'm trilingual. I can communicate in 3 different languages. I'm trilingual as well. It's pretty cool, isn't it? It's amazing. So let's just check a little bit. Let's just see what some of you have answer. So, okay. For some reason, how can I get the results, Disal? Because I'm not able to get the results here. I have already clicked on getting the results and sharing them, but yet it's not showing. Could you assist me on that? Otherwise, we will just move on, because I've seen that a little bit less than half of you have already answered, but for some reason I can't get, it doesn't really work. It didn't work out. Okay, no worries, guys. So then if you just can quickly write it down here, why do you consider yourself bilingual and how does it work? Apologies, it did not work out. It's an issue with, well, technology. So feel free to share your own experiences like Patricia did. Okay, I really want to get to know you a little bit more. Okay, so not to delay our talk, so I'm going to start to talk a little bit about what really matters. So bilingualism. Okay, so anyone who has seen a small child code switching from one language to another, it's like, I mean, probably this person will be amazed and perhaps a little bit envious because somehow it seems so effortless. In some parts of the world, this is actually quite normal for children to be exposed to two or even more languages. In countries such as England, Scotland, Wales, for example, in the UK, stories of immigrant children interpreting for their parents at the NHS, at hospitals, are commonplace. In this scenario, the bilingual acquisition lies in the family language policy, okay, more than in bilingual or international schooling. Okay. In Brazil, instead, although we do have immigrants, at least in English, the importance of speaking English is catered by bilingual programs throughout the country. And actually has even been discussed already in one of the New Roots editorials. So feel free to check it out. So in this talk in particular, I will discuss the benefits of being bilingual since an early age, and I will focus only on early bilinguals, because if you study a little bit of bilingualism, you know that there are, well, different labels, and in terms of cognitive cognition and learning, it might change depending on their age. So here I will call a bilingual person a person who is immersed in more than one language, either because their home language, like in England, for instance, is different from the community language, or because they chose to attend a school in which the target language, the language used to teach and to interact with their teachers and peers, is different from the one used at home. So then, again, you have a home language and community language. So Though it seems to be so natural to see people speaking more than one language, to see, especially in Europe, but also here, immigrants talking in different languages when they are walking on the streets. The societies, they have grown up, the ones who have grown up with more than one language, they are actually regarded as special. And it's interesting to see that although the literature in bilingualism and bilingualism itself and the studies about bilingualism are not that recent, still bilingualism is surrounded by false beliefs and misunderstandings. Many people still are ready to believe that handling two languages at the same time is too much of a burden for an infant's brain. The language, one, two, whatever you wanted to label, the languages, they compete for resources in the brain at the expense of general cognitive development. The contrast between these false beliefs and the amazement often expressed by people at how easily children pick up two or more languages has been in the literature called bilingual paradox. And it's pretty much based on this bilingual paradox that I based my article. So my article was based on, and I will also base this talk. So the impact bilingualism has in children's cognitive development, it is a hot topic of discussion. In academic papers, online, if you Google it, you will find tons of different blogs, wikis, many of which are from writers from outside academia. And that when the danger lies pretty much there. And you have to be a little bit cautious about that. Because many of these publications may just, let's say, write about false beliefs that are not really based on academic studies like experiments. Now, they are popular indeed. And some of them are really, as I said, these informed decisions are made by non-specialists. But what I mean by non-specialists, I'm not just saying it could be any person. It could be a doctor, it could be a teacher, it could be a family member. What I mean by non-specialists are people who are not researchers in bilingualism, okay, who are not from this field. So, and these assumptions, for example, can have a great impact on many parents who want, for example, to raise their children bilingual, to speak two languages. When researching the topic, they are likely to hear somewhere that exposure to two languages can cause problems in the acquisition of the child's first language, which I will show you that it's not really true. For this fact, this can hinder, can stop parents' attempt to raise their children bilingual. Before they even tried, before they even started. Some, they may even stop there. Others, they may wait so the child or their children will acquire their first language and then they will then opt to teach a second or third language later on, either through second language learning in language schools or at home. So then, in an attempt to demystify what are considered to be the benefits of early bilingualism, I will debate the 3 myths I have presented already in the article published at New Roots. So the first myth I talked about there is the myth number 1, the link between bilingualism and general intelligence. Number 2, the link between general cognitive development and bilingualism. And 3, the critical period for language acquisition, which is a hot topic in language acquisition itself. I'm fully aware of how these concepts are complex and how the environment where the child is inserted and its social linguistic characteristics can play a role. For this reason, in this discussion, I will only talk about early bilinguals. Early bilinguals are infants who are exposed to 2 languages from early age on regular basis. I would also like to make clear that we should be careful when distinguishing these children from the ones taking regular weekly language courses. Children taking language courses twice a week, once a week, are not early bilinguals because they are not exposed to the target language, be it Spanish, English, whatever, for a long period of time. Normally, they are just exposed for 1-2 hours, a couple of hours a week. I also don't intend to discourage second language teaching by all means. Learning languages are important in terms of cognitive development, be it when you are really young, later on when you're 10, even when you are already a full grown up. Okay, you can still find in the literature and in tons of different academic papers and researches lots of different benefits. So it's really beneficial. So I just want to make clear that second language learners, also known in the literature as late bilinguals, are different from early bilinguals. So this is something that we have I would like to make it really clear. For more information about their differences, how does it work, I would recommend to get some papers from Sorachi, and I will write it down her surname here, a scholar from Edinburgh University. Well, she's very, very famous. She has worked on very different papers about bilingualism and also the benefits of bilingualism in late learners, or also the benefits in terms of cognitive development that someone can have later on when delaying, for example, some diseases that we will talk about soon. So she's one. Then I would also like to share Grozen, who has like a little bit like a more sociolinguistic approach to it. Yes, it's Antonella Soraci. She's an amazing researcher and person as well. And, well, these are just some, okay, guys. What I consider to be like the most important ones, but there are lots, there are many people. Okay. So I also want to make clear that I don't consider our talk finished by no means. Okay, this discussion finished. As I mentioned before, the article and this talk were mainly created with the goal of steering a little bit this debate and bringing into light some of the already consolidated topics studied in the literature and how we can interpret and use them in our daily lives, either as parents, teachers, and how we can take profit of it. So let's then start to talk about the very first myth, which is the link between general intelligence and bilingualism. So you may have already heard about this myth and that bilingual children are less intelligent than monolingual ones or vice versa. Um, there is no proved link really in the literature between general intelligence and bilingualism. Although early research, if you look back in the literature at the very beginning of, well, 60s, 50s, research in the 60s suggests that bilinguals have a cognitive handicap. Decade later, 1 decade later only, like so in the 70s, and nowadays, other studies have shown that bilinguals are not that handicapped. Some of them say that they are more intelligent, others say that they are equally intelligent. So, based on the myth above, we could then assume that the knowledge of more than one language either makes the bilingual speaker automatically smarter or not, or handicapped. Which one do you think is correct? Well, the answer is simple, neither of them. Okay. More recent studies argued that both conclusions have been found to be marred by failing to take important cultural and sociolinguistic, sociological effects into account. So it's more than just cognition. Okay? It's a little bit more. It has to do also with the environment in itself. So what we know for a fact are these three things. So the experience of dealing with more than one language at a time does seem to give, indeed, more cognitive advantages in several domains, especially in tasks that involve cognitive flexibility and control of attention. So our brain is a muscle, right? So imagine that speaking two languages on daily basis. So what I mean is that now I'm speaking English, then I will switch to Italian, and then I will switch to Portuguese, and then I will switch to English again, which is pretty much what it happens at my house. It's pretty much like going to the gym. Your brain gets super strong. Okay. So therefore, Obviously, in tasks that involve flexibility and control of attention, because they have to control and inhibit one language. So, for example, if right now if I'm saying something in English, I have to inhibit Portuguese and Italian, okay? Which takes an effort in cognitive terms. So, the link between cognitive control and bilingualism has to do with the fact that they have this powerful mechanism for keeping the two languages separate. Okay? And it's interesting to see already with very young children how do they behave when they know that their carers speak their language or speak both language, in the sense that, for example, if a child speaks English and Spanish, how would they behave? Because then, for instance, if I get a pen and I can only retrieve in my brain, so this is how to label this in Spanish and not in English, and I know that the person speaks Spanish, it's the it's the least effort law, pretty much, right? So I will just say it in Spanish. But if instead I know for a fact that the person I'm talking to is only English and knows only English, because being in English doesn't mean that you don't speak more than one language, then I would just have to take my sweet time, if I can't think about how to label this in English, to find the proper way of saying it. So I'll have to find, let's say, pen. So this mechanism in itself increases the ability to multitask as well, because imagine you have different labels, you have to just select the right one depending on the person you are interacting with, talking to. So these cognitive advantages are maintained in old age, and they have helped to delay age-related brain pathologies, such as, for example, Alzheimer's disease. So if you would like to know more about this, there are a bunch of different studies. Antonella has done some, Sorachi has done some, Bielstock has done some, and a very nice one as well that it was published was this one. There we go. Okay. So look at how super fit our brain is. Look at that. And happy and healthy. Okay. So before I move on, do you have any questions? No? Okay. Feel free to ask. Okay. Every now and then I'll check. So let's talk about myth number 2. So the link between general cognitive development and bilingualism. So when we talk about bilingualism, we also have the stigma of, wow, it's a burden. The burden of handling 2 languages. Jesus, this is so hard. And therefore may slow down the general cognitive development. This idea is based on the assumption that the brain is naturally it was built basically to deal with only one language, which is not really true. Research in neuroscience and psychology suggests that there are no foundation to the belief that being monolingual is actually the biological norm. Okay. While it is true that the onset, so the beginning of the speech in bilinguals, may occur a little bit later sometimes than the average children when compared to monolingual children. Both monolingual and bilingual children go through the same major milestones in language development at almost the same time. Okay. Now, here I'm talking about normally, so children who have developed normally, okay, they don't have any kind of sort of impairment, language impairment or learning impairment. Okay. So if we look at the milestones in language development, we will see that bending will happen around 6 to 12 months. So still okay. The first words, they will start to pop up at the end of the first year. The fifth word stage around 14 to 18 months. Two-word stage, utterance stage, 18 to 24. The emergence of multi-word utterances, sometimes around the second year, will happen. And it's really cute to see how they deal with both languages, especially if they know that you speak both languages. Because then, again, as I said, it's the least minimal effort, pretty much. So if they know that you already speak the language and they are only able to retrieve pen instead of caneta, they will say pen. And then obviously it will depend on the family policy and the school policy to be strict and say, no, here we speak blah, blah. We only speak English. Or no, I'm sorry, but I don't understand that. I've, for example, during my master's, I've analyzed a family that is fantastic because it was one parent, one language. So the mother spoke Portuguese and the father spoke English, Scottish English. And the other family, they were both Brazilian living in Edinburgh. And one would think, wow, these children, the ones that both parents are Brazilian, they will definitely have an amazing Portuguese. But that doesn't really play the role. Because it really depends on how do you set the rules, in the sense like the house rules. So while the first family, though one parent was Brazilian, the other was Scottish, and you have the community language was also English, so you only have one person to teach Portuguese. She was a really nice lady, and she was really strict. So at home, they would only speak Portuguese. It helped the fact that her husband lived in Brazil and he also spoke Portuguese. So, and he would code switch as he pleased. So that helps. The other family, instead, they were immigrants that probably, again, I haven't done any further social linguistic study to really claim this. This is just an educated guess, really. But they were immigrants. They themselves had to learn English. So they had this idea that speaking English was more important. So, and they were they weren't very strict. So they would allow their children to speak whatever language they wanted. Which, if you want to follow the family language and the community language, it's not the best approach. I'm not saying that these children did not speak Portuguese. They did. They actually, what I mean by did is that they were able to understand Portuguese perfectly, but they will respond in English. Okay, so this is just one thing just to show you how bilingualism works and how this, it's more than just cognition, it's more than just that. It's, you have to take into account so many different things in order to have a successful bilingual child. Okay, okie dokie. So now, do you have any questions before we start to have fun and talk a little bit about Chomsky and things like that? So somebody's typing something. Well, so the community plays a big role. The exposure and the amount of exposure plays a big role. So far, so good. What's a successful bilingual child? Actually, it's the child that speaks both language. Actually, I wouldn't say successful. I'm sorry for this term, pardon. I should have used a more academic one, in the sense that you would have a balanced bilingual, and which by no means is more or less successful than the other bilinguals, but this one is the one that this person is as good as, so for example, in Portuguese, as good as in English. So you would speak both languages quite well. It's quite rare, actually, to have a balanced bilingual, because sometimes you have someone who speaks really well Portuguese, but they still have the English accent, or the other way around, or they just refer back to some grammatical structures in English because they mix. Okay. What do you mean, Melissa? The parents, from family too? Is that what you're asking? Because it was interesting that they would code switch, so they would speak. So it was really interesting. So sometimes they would start their conversation in Portuguese, and then they would talk about work. Work would trigger English because, well, they work in Scotland. I myself, to tell you the truth, if I were asked to explain my research in Portuguese or in Italian, I'm not saying that I would not be able to, but it would have probably take me longer, and I would have to prepare, and because I'm not used to the jargon in another language. Okay, I have a couple of friends, and they are raising multilingual kids. The way the kids communicate is really interesting. So just okay, what do you mean by interesting? Just develop it a little bit more. Is there a difference in cognitive aspects between bilingual and multilingual child? Not really. Okay. There are studies about trilingual children. Sorachi has also done a couple of them. I have worked with just bilingual children, but it's not that if you are bilingual, you're super strong against Alzheimer. You're twice as strong. Because, for example, when it comes to Alzheimer, if you are bilingual, normally the fact of being bilingual delays in at least 4 to 6 years the onset. Would that then mean that if you are trilingual, then it would be 10 years or 11 years? I don't know. there aren't any research done yet. Okay, so one parent, one language, Cantonese, Polish, and the community speaks French. The parents communicate with each other in English. So it's a lot of different languages, but the kids seem to be perfectly fine. So imagine that these children, and we will talk a little bit about this now at myth number 3, learning languages, our brain is very plastic, okay, throughout until we die, basically, but especially when we are children. So imagine that our brain goes grocery shopping. Okay, so they go to the supermarket and it goes there and it gets Portuguese, Spanish, French, Japanese at the same time. Obviously, that the amount of input, that is the thing that it's important, because you might get just a couple of hours exposed to Japanese, for example, for 1 hour a week. Instead, Portuguese is 12 hours and English, I don't know, the other 12, and so on and so forth until we are done with the hours. I don't know. So the amount of hours, so the amount of input counts. Okay. And that's why we can't compare second language learners and bilingual children, because they were exposed and the input they had received is much, well, it's bigger. Okay. And they will be fine to code switch. They will be fine. Probably sooner or later, what it will happen to this family is that they will find like a, I don't know, a one language that they will speak in the house and the other one at the community. Or it might be that, which can happen. I've seen that. So especially when children, I mean, when they want something from you. So I've seen that with these family in Scotland. So they were twins. That's something I didn't mention. And whenever the little girl wanted something from her mom, she would speak Portuguese. So they also use languages, the way they use their language and the way they select their language is also depends on, well, the medium of conversation, of course, but also the way they code switch will depend on many things. So if you could, for example, just to mention out of my mind a couple of scholars who you could go back to for code switching, there is a very nice one by Chase. What else? Joseph Gafaranga from Edinburgh. He deals with this idea of one family, one policy. So with family policies, language policies, which is really interesting, and which would be the case of your friend Melissa. Okay, so it's all about the language policy. Okay. And I mean, language policy doesn't necessarily need to be family language policy. It could be also country, for example, in Switzerland, for example. People there, they speak German, French, and Italian. Okay. And how are they able to maintain these languages? So they have very strict policies, they laid and they are very well laid out. I mean, established. Okay. Now, any questions? Okay. So Let me know if you want me to speed up. Now, so see here, the girls, this is what I meant about going to the supermarket. So the critical period, some studies in the critical period, and this is something that we will talk a lot about now, well, a little bit because we don't have much time. So they say that from 0 until 10, 11, the age of puberty, more or less, you can acquire as many languages as you want as first language. Okay. Again, theoretically speaking, input and the whole environment and the sociolinguistic environment in itself plays a very, very big role. And actually, Chomsky himself, when he coined the whole idea about language acquisition, at first he did not consider the input, but now he does. Well, it's been a while actually that he does. Okay. So our final myth is people can't get languages, learn languages properly after the critical period of language acquisition. Okay. So here, unlike the two previous ones, the first two myths presented so far, this belief has some scientific basis, but it's still worth taking a closer look. If you have read about language acquisition, it's very likely that you are familiar with the so-called critical period theory. Chomsky, for example, I have already mentioned him, is one of the most famous researchers supporting this theory. He stressed the contribution of two factors to the proper acquisition of language. So, a language acquisition device that is innate, you were born with it, you have the ability to acquire language. Yay, awesome. A neurological wired, so in terms of cognitive wires, a mechanism that specifies which rules are possible in human language that has to do a little bit with the innate knowledge and the language input. That all of this will not work if you don't have the language input. So, for example, and just to clarify how this language input is important, in different researches, there are some examples of insufficient language input and support, which actually supports this theory. A very famous case is of a girl called Jean. Okay. Is it possible that there are actually many critical periods instead of just one or even a critical period at all? Darling, that's one thing that we could spend like a whole month talking. There are many different researchers just defending different things. At first, it was the critical period would just stop at 6, and then it has increased. Does it actually have? How does it work? The fact is that, and as you will see now, we do somehow have some innate knowledge. Okay, so that's important. So going back to the Jean's case, so Jeannie, actually her name is Jeannie, there was a typo here, is a well-known example of the privation of language input during a critical period. Poor girl. She was kept in isolation since the age of 20 months until she was 13.9 years. All through this time, and possibly also before the age of 20 months, she has barely been spoken to. Jeannie did not speak at all when she was discovered. In the following months, she did acquire some language, but the process was slow and inefficient. Whereas her vocabulary was consistently growing, they grew, actually. She failed to develop normal syntax. Her speech contained no question words, no demonstratives, and no particles. She also failed to construct sentences because, of course, if you don't have any of these grammatical rules, how can you actually construct a sentence? So this example, for example, well, sorry for so many examples. So this Janie's example demonstrates a crucial point regarding critical periods for first language acquisition. Here I'm talking about first language acquisition. Okay, so lots and lots of studies have been done dealing with first language acquisition. So in this case, different language domains may show different acquisition paths with different critical periods. So sometimes someone may learn syntax before, after, and it will depend really on what they are learning. Okay, now I'm talking about monolinguals. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about bilinguals. Okay, so when it comes to bilingual acquisition, the literature has shown that simultaneous early exposure to more than one language seems to provide an effortless, natural path to becoming bilingual. But would that then be the same what we are talking about older learners? Would that happen? Are these differences a result from age-related changes? I don't know. So when it comes to second language speakers, we know for a fact that the outcome of second language acquisitions in adults is different from first language acquisition in children. It has been already proved. And also from second language acquisition in children. Okay? But we do not have yet a definite answer to explain why this occurs. There's lots of different theories, but we are still trying to figure them out. Okay, lots of different people saying that no, you can't really acquire this, you can't really acquire that. Well, what it matters is that these differences they result from an age when they result from an age-related changes in a more general skills such as memory, for example, or these are just some theories. Okay, so is it memory? Is it that's why they don't learn the same way, or is it due to a decline in a specific linguistic skills that then prevailing the critical period theory? Does that mean that after I don't know, when we are already 18, that's game over and we can't learn a second language? No, we can learn a second language, and even a profession, grammatically speaking. If we have been through the process of acquired language once, why then couldn't second language acquisition be helped by transferable skills? So we would transfer one thing from the other. They are pretty much, they are already in place, so why not? But as I said before, we don't have yet a definite response to exactly how good an adult can become at second language. In other words, we don't know yet what the actual limits of adult second language are. One thing we know for a fact is that the most obvious difference is this one. Just get here. The near native, oopsie, sorry guys. There we go. So the near native speakers versus bilingual speakers, right? So near native speakers retain a foreign accent. What I mean by near native speakers are speakers who have been living in England or whatever. They speak, they work, they even here when you teach English, probably you or another language, Spanish, you may spend much more time speaking in English than Portuguese, right? So, and yet you retain a foreign accent. I have mine. I've been living in England for so long, and yet, there we go. Thus, it seems that early exposure to a language may play some role in attuning the speakers to the phonetic details of that specific language. So it might seem that when they go to the supermarket, remember when we talked about it there, they may get more phonemes. So then they can have also the phonemes of that language that they are learning and not just of their first language. Okay. As for grammatical abilities, so when we talk about near native speakers, so the knowledge of morphology and syntax are native-like. However, this knowledge may sometimes temporarily fail, which is the famous slip of tongue. That you say something, you say, oh my God, I hate myself, I made a mistake, bad second language learner, okay? But yeah, so that difference in morphology and, but the most prominent one is by far phonetics. Morphology and syntax, and even the ability of correcting yourself and sometimes even hating yourself for the fact that you made a mistake, you say, is actually good because we make mistakes in our first languages and we are not as picky. Okay. Now, just to finalize then our talk. In any case, I mean, this was just a brief introduction to a sea of things that we could talk about it. Okay. We could dive in and talk about language policies and talk about the social linguistics behind those policies. We could talk about cognition and how would that work. We could talk about bilingualism, language impairment, or late bilingualism, or the benefits of bilingualism in avoiding cognitive diseases later on. Okay. So as I've written in my article, in doubt, why don't we then try to raise our children bilingual if we can. Okay, so that's all. There you go. Okay, so that's me. So this is the website of Educantes. We also offer some courses there in Portuguese as well. And this is the my email. Feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer to all your questions and point to the literature whenever you want. Okay. So do you have any questions? How can we teach grammar without being boring or giving those old-fashioned classes? Oh, you should watch one of my talks about gamification and how to curate your material. I get bored myself, so I tend to use lots of flipped learning and lots of games. And feel free to go to Educantes. The courses are free of charge. Check them out. We have 10 different ones there dealing with that, how to create content. Feel free to use it. Games are good options indeed. Thanks. The problem is that business people are into games most of the time. Depends on the game you propose, because they might not be like, people are competitive. They love the whole idea of having leaderboards and winning badges. If you propose an activity in which they have to, for example, hire someone. I have published a paper on how I used gamification to teach how to write CVs and role play job interviews with my students at the university. I will, it's gamifying. So if you check me out, so this is my name. If you go to, if you write to me, I'll send you the paper. Okay, I'll send you the link. Okay. So guys, that's all. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I will be more than happy to answer. Again, this was just a brief, really short introduction, and I hope it was helpful.